So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lance. I'm a senior product specialist. I work with pretty much all of our sample manager accounts and making sure that they have the support that they need, onboarding, implementing customer support afterwards. So you're probably all sick of hearing from me, but I'm going to talk for a little bit more. So you're going to hear from me a little bit more. And today I want to talk about something that's really relevant no matter how long you've been using Sample Manager, and it's revisiting your sample strategy. It's all about making sure your system grows with you instead of becoming something you work around, because something that might have worked when you were onboarding and being implemented might not work so much now for various reasons. And as I go through this presentation, feel free to leave questions either in the Q&A or the chat, and I'll try to read them at the end. And if I can't get to your questions at the end, I'll follow up with an email. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So, why should you be revisiting your strategy? When it comes to LabKey, teams don't really outgrow our software. It was designed to grow with you either by being flexible and adding new sample types or data structures, or even upgrading to new tiers of our software or exploring our other software options. But they do sometimes outgrow how they originally set it up. Maybe your data model was built quickly during onboarding due to tight deadlines, and now you have a better understanding of how Sample Manager works. You might want to rework some things. Maybe there's been new teams or studies added, and you have new requirements or workflows that you want to add. Maybe your library of samples has expanded and you need a better way of managing them. Or maybe there's features in Sample Manager you haven't fully explored as part of your original implementation, which is likely because we're always adding brand new functionality. And doing this can be actually fairly easy. We're designed to be flexible and allow you to grow with the system. So this is something that you can definitely do on your own, but of course, we're more than happy to help at any time, so always feel free to contact us. So with that in mind, today we're really going to be focusing on three key areas of your strategy. We want to focus on data integrity, which is making sure your data is clean, consistent, and reliable. It's going to be your source of truth. This is what your system is basically has its basic foundation with. We're going to be focusing on maintaining your system, keeping the system organized and usable over time. Everything in the lab needs maintenance. Your software is the same way. And then we're going to be discussing how do you actually expand your use so your system continues to support your lab as your lab grows. And then we're going to be focusing on easy strategies for you to do this. So let's start with your data foundation and really put it under the microscope. A good question to ask is, how do I know if I even have a problem? You're in your data all the time, you might be used to it, so some issues might not be standing out as much as they probably should be. Some common signs that I often see with folks is that they have difficulty filtering or searching through their data. And this could be because they have so many variations of the same values, like they have serum red tops, they have serum, they have red tops, they have a bunch of different things that mean the same thing. So we want to reduce those duplications. There may be users that are manually performing calculations, and anything that requires a manual calculation introduces the risk of human error. So we want to reduce those risks. And then maybe some groups are missing QC events. Maybe their data is not standing out as much as it needs to when there's a quality issue, or maybe they're missing some data, or maybe they're entering in data that just doesn't make sense for that data field. So if any of these feel familiar, there are some straightforward things that we can do to really improve this. So how do we go about improving that data integrity? To fix this, one of the easiest things you can do is just remove free text fields whenever possible. While free text gives flexibility, you can enter in whatever it is that you want, it also introduces inconsistency, like those red top tubes, those serum red tops, or the serum tubes. Instead, you'll want to convert these fields into controlled fields like text choice, integer, or decimal. The goal here is to standardize input so your data becomes easier to filter, report on, and trust. And to change something from like a text field to a text choice is actually pretty simple in Sample Manager. If you go into your sample type design or your source type design, you edit it, you can actually go to one of these text choices, click that drop down, and text choice will be one of the options. If you do that, we're going to automatically add every single option that's already in your system as a text choice, and then you can go back and edit all of those duplicative values. To fix your historical data, again, you're going to go to your source or sample type. You're going to filter through the data field that's giving you issues. With this, you can select all of the different options that you have in order to make sure that you're selecting all those duplicates. You'll edit those samples in bulk by selecting the drop-down option that matters most for you. And doing so, you'll then update the sources, and that's going to change everything over to the item that you want. Once you've finished upgrading all of those historical samples, the data's clean, you can go back to your source or sample type, edit that data field to get rid of the options you are no longer using. This will then restrict you to only entering in that text choice that you've selected to increase that data integrity and making sure your users are referring to items the same exact way. And from there, you can see all the data is clean. And we're going to revisit this specific field, so you'll see it a little bit later after we've cleaned it up for how we're searching for it. So keep an eye out for that. But then we could further restrict data that's being entered through validators under data field validation options. This might be useful for maybe fields that you do need a free text field where you're entering in data, but you want to add some certain requirements that free text field has. This can be applied to those fields, such as the text should always start with a capital letter or numerical value. It should end in a certain letter. And this could be useful if you're scanning in barcodes to those free text fields, but they always start or end the same way for specific sample types. So if I'm adding a blood sample type, it's always going to start with the letter B, but if I'm entering a plasma sample type, it's going to start with the letter P. By having that validator, we can make sure we're not scanning in samples to the incorrect sample type. So this kind of helps reduce likelihood of errors. You can also use these validators to make sure that these fields are a certain number of characters long. So if you have error codes or different things, you can make sure that you're entering in characters that are 3 characters long. You can also make sure only certain numerical values or dates are being entered to avoid impossible results. This could be, I want to enter in values that are between 1 and 10. It should never be a negative, should always be greater than 5, or only after the year 2000, right? If you're entering a date of birth for a person, they're probably not born before the year 1900, so you can try to restrict that. If a value is entered outside of your validator, users will not be able to upload a sample and they will receive an error message that you can configure to provide guidance on how to resolve this issue. In this example, I have a numerical field that must always be greater than the value 0. I have my error message that I've personally configured to provide users some feedback of what they need to do. And below it, you can see I try to enter something that falls outside of that validated range, and I have that error message pop up. In order to add these, again, you're going to go to your source or sample type, and then you're going to go ahead and edit that sample type, source type design. You'll scroll down to your custom fields, and in this, I'm just adding a brand new field just to start from scratch. So I'm going to add a brand new field. In this case, it's going to be an integer, but again, you can do this with multiple field types. I'm going to name that. And then once that's ready, I'm going to go ahead and click that arrow by that sample type name, and it's going to bring up these advanced sample options. I'm going to create a range validator, enter in my conditions. In this case, my range validator, it has to be greater than 5, and then it needs to be less than 20. I'm going to go ahead and I can add a description if I want. I'll add my error message. So if I enter something outside of range, I have some feedback to my users of how to add the correct values. I'm going to name it. That way I can go back to that validator, update it at any time. So this is just 5 to 20. I'm going to apply it, save that sample type, and then I'm going to test it. It's always important to test these to make sure you did it correctly. I'm going to add a brand new sample, and I'm going to create something outside of that validated range. So I'm adding something that's 25. You can see my error message came up, so then I can go back and fix it to the range that I expect. But sometimes these aren't so cut and dry. Sometimes you do want to accept values outside of certain ranges, and that's fine because maybe there's something wrong with a test kit or a reagent, and you get something outside of range. You still want to accept it in the system, but you want to highlight that there might be something wrong for you to investigate. Another great tool would be to reduce manual calculations or flag certain things with our calculated fields, which is found in Sample Manager Professional and above. These calculated fields can look at varying data fields in your tables and have some really fun results. You can perform typical calculations like multiplying, dividing, adding, subtracting to find things like the concentration of a sample. But you can also add days or hours to collection dates to determine when a sample may outdate. You can have logic programmed with if-then statements. For example, if my blood sample was collected in a tube type A and I'm running test B to this specific sample, then sample needs buffer A added to it. You can have very complex if-then statements and it can combine those other calculations. And I can do this without having to look at my long list of tables with varying outcomes depending on varying factors. Sample Manager will automatically tell you what you need to do, and so it reduces the error of me looking at something in the wrong cell. Another thing that you can do, which we kind of touched about with our validators, is flagging values outside of expected ranges. This allows you to have that flexibility to enter it, but we're going to flag it. So if I enter something uh, that shouldn't be between 5 and 20, but I entered 25, I can say, hey, this is outside of expected range and automatically flag it. So a couple of examples I have here are I have a few calculated fields. First thing to know is I manually entered in this consent date either through me typing it in a spreadsheet or an API, but then I have a calculated field that's going to calculate when that consent expires, and it's going to be a year after a patient gave that specific consent. I also have another calculated field that's counting down how much time I have until that patient needs to have their consent form updated. This was a screenshot taken quite a while ago, so it's kind of out of date, but this does update every single time you load the grid, so you'll have a more up-to-date version of what's going on. I then have another calculated field that's going to flag those things that are outside of those ranges I expect. So it's going to flag if a patient has not consented, and it's going to flag if the consent expiration date has passed. So this is really giving me a visual cue that something's wrong, so I don't use the wrong samples. I'm not pulling samples from the wrong patient. And you'll see here that we're highlighting these in red. This is part of our lab key limbs with conditional formatting, so I can highlight values uh, based off of specific rules I set up to make sure that they're popping out more to reduce the likelihood we're pulling something incorrectly. And to add these calculated columns, again, you're going to edit your sample type or source type design. You'll go down to your fields and you're going to add a calculation field. You'll give it whatever name it is, and this is where you can start typing in your formula. So I'm typing in case when, this is like an if-then statement. I'm going to refer to other data fields in this specific table. So whenever the QC state is failed QC, then I'm going to automatically flag it that I need to say that it's failed QC, or that it has something that I need to bring my attention to. I can refer to any of these other tables along with this specific one, and we're using SQL expression to do that. So if you hover over the question mark by that, it's going to bring you to our SQL documentation, so you can read the many, 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 many things that you can do with calculated fields. Of course, if you're not used to SQL, always reach out to us, and we're more than happy to help you write those calculated fields as well as those validators. But we're also soon going to be launching our AI, as Hannah kind of touched upon, to really help users use real language to write these for them. So we're trying to make sure that support piece is also here with doing these really cool different functions in Sample Manager. So those are some ways that you can really work on your data integrity. But next, we want to focus on maintaining your system. And the key question is, again, how do you know if this is an issue? Some signs may include your freezers are packed full of things you no longer need. There's old or unused projects that are still visible to users and cluttering their sample grids. And you don't really have a set routine for cleaning out the lab. So how do we go about changing that? There's a few simple ways to address this. You can use custom views and filters through those grid views that show all of your samples, all of your sources, to help users really focus on what matters day to day. And so we're going to kind of look at an example of here and customizing my grid view for this specific sample. So I'm going to go to these views. I'm going to customize this grid view. Here, I can then get rid of any of these different data columns that I no longer want to see. It's not relevant to me. It's not going to delete the data. It's just not going to be visible to you. I can also add other data fields that might not already be in here, including fields from my ancestors. And quick tip here, you can click that data field you want to have it right after, add that data, it's going to put it right there on the sample grid. Now I'm filtering through all of my samples that are from a mouse. So we're going to pull everything that's not blank. So these are all my mice blood samples. I'm then going to save this as a custom grid view so I can quickly get back to this. And it's going to save all of the grid view data fields that I've said I want to be visible, and it's going to apply those filters. You can have as many different custom grid views as you want. You can keep them private. You can share them with your other users. And this really allows you to have different views depending on the workflows that are relevant to you and only see the samples that are relevant to you without having to apply those views every single time. The goal here is to reduce noise without losing information. So from here, we can also use folders in Sample Manager Professional and up to partition data relevant to specific teams. Steve did talk about this earlier, but I'm also going to rehash it because I think it's pretty important for users to understand. So with these folders, you'll go into your admin settings, go to folders. You can create a brand new folder from scratch, or you can edit folders that already exist. Here, I can select the sample types, source types, assay designs, and storage units that I want this specific folder to have access to. If I jump from my folders to folders, I can see how the views may vary depending on what teams are assigned to these. And like Steve said earlier, these folder views are based off of the security that you said are relevant for teams. So if I'm a user that has access to folder A, but not folder B, I won't be able to see anything in folder B. I'll only be able to see what's assigned to folder A. So this is a great way to really make sure that your system stays secure, you're only sharing data that's visible, and help to reduce that noise that other users might not have. You can also archive your folders, as Steve said earlier, and I'll just kind of quickly show you how to do that. Again, you'll go to your admin settings, go to your folders, select the folder you wish to archive, and archive that folder. That's going to move everything in that folder to our archive section. So it's in this dropdown under archive folders. So it doesn't really clog up your views, but you can always go to it at any time, so long as you have the right permissions, and you can unarchive it at any time. So if you have those projects that you no longer really need to view, you just need to keep record of, this is a great method of doing that. Another tool to help maintain your system is using Sample Finder to find samples you need to carry out specific actions on. You can identify samples based on date ranges, projects, or specific attributes from their ancestor lineage. This is incredibly useful for cleanup efforts, especially when you're trying to decide what can be archived, what can be discarded, or if you have researchers that are like, I want to see all of my patients that have a certain diagnosis. As Zach said, if they have chronic illness or if they're spontaneously cleared an infection, this is a great place to do it. Um, and with Sample Finder, you can get there by going to the search bar, clicking that arrow, and going to Sample Finder. We then have sample properties, parent properties, source properties, and assay properties. With the source properties, I'm trying to find all my samples that came from that bulb C strain, which we cleaned up earlier, so it's just the one bulb C. Then I want to find all my samples that have an available status. And then from here, I want to see all my samples that have those characteristics that are missing CBC test results so I can go back in and see if I need to re-add them. I can go to my save searches, jump around between things that might be relevant to me. And then all of those filters that I applied earlier, I can also save as a custom search so I don't have to reapply those filters every single time. But this is a fantastic tool that's really powerful of getting down to the data that's relevant for your specific workflow. And then finally, you can make maintenance proactive instead of reactive. You can use things like calculated fields, so you can track things like a sample's age or expiration, or if it needs to be flagged for QC. You can use custom grid views to filter items that are older or expiring. And with Sample Finder, you can search for items that may have different characteristics that indicate they need to be disposed of, like a patient has withdrawn their consent. Then with workflows, you can create processes for reviewing or disposing samples based on the filters and grid views you've applied. This turns maintenance into a repeatable, manageable process instead of periodic cleanup projects that kind of take over your lab's entire workflow and disrupts everything. So I kind of want to show how we can go about using our workflows for these items. In this specific sample grid, I'm performing maintenance on my different instruments. I have instruments set up as a sample type because we're performing actions on them that I want to track. Here, I'm having my freezers and centrifuge tracked. I have the instrument type and the date calibration was last performed on. I'm using a calculated column to see when we next need to perform maintenance, and that date varies depending on the type of instrument we're looking at. So we're using a combination of if this is a freezer, then maintenance will be performed after X amount of time, but if it's a centrifuge, then it'll be performed after Y amount of time. So we have that going on. We're also using a calculation to determine how much time I have left until I need to perform maintenance. So I fell behind on these two instruments, so they're negatives, which highlights I need to do that fairly quickly. And with our automation and limbs, this is a very basic workflow. Hannah's going to go into more detail, but I can actually go ahead and select every single instrument here. I'm going to add them to my workflows, and I'm going to go based off a template I've already set up. So we're going to go to instrument calibration. And with these workflows, I can see I have filters applied. So I want to perform calibration on instruments that have the time remaining of 1 month or less. So it's going to pull up those three instruments that meet that criteria. I can assign these workflows to whoever may need it, have due dates. But from this workflow, I'm going to go to these tasks. I'm going to click the instruments that I need to perform maintenance on. So I have a list that's populated. I can go and perform my maintenance, mark that task as complete. And then my next task is I need to update these specific instruments that I have updated their instrument calibration date. So we're going to select those, edit them in bulk, have today's date, which is just entering it in very quickly, updating those samples. And now you can see I no longer have instruments that meet that criteria. So I no longer have work that I need to perform. Makes it much easier to do these with this workflow automation. And of course, this was a very, very basic one just to kind of show the basic foundations of this. It can be much more complex. You can do a lot more functionality with it. So we're really excited to talk about it today, and Hannah will go in more depth on it. And then the last area after you've improved or evaluating how you want to improve your data integrity, how you want to maintain your system, it's actually expanding your usage, which is where you're going to really feel that impact. We've covered a couple of ways to identify where you may need to grow and some action items you can do to support that growth. But how do you actually go about making those changes? Adding expansion usually comes up when your system is working, but maybe not as efficiently as it could with some of those examples we've given earlier today. Some signs may include you have new workflows or projects being added for your team to manage. Your team may be running into bottlenecks and certain workflows are slowing down. And then your sample volume may have increased significantly. Those friction points are your biggest opportunities for improvement, and we try to make it as easy as possible to actually kind of improve on those. So a great place to start is identifying those bottlenecks. Look at your workflows end to end and ask, where are things slowing down? Where are handoffs breaking down? You'll also want to look at any new projects your teams will be taking on soon and ask, do they have new requirements or new data needs? You'll want to document those needs and compare them with your current workflows. And then it's possible that you might need to add new sample types, adjust the way you're importing data, or start using new features in Sample Manager. So what Richard talked about earlier today with our validation is very similar here. You need to document what your ideal situation looks like and then go about how can Sample Manager meet those requirements. So once you've identified where changes need to occur, the next step will be to designing a solution, but it doesn't really have to be overwhelming. We recommend new users start small and start adding improvements over time. So like Zach said earlier today, you start with one study and then you add another study and kind of go from there. That way you don't get bogged down with decision fatigue, or you kind of get overwhelmed and just freeze and you don't do anything, right? We've seen that happen, so we start small. And then you'll go about configuring Sample Manager to meet those needs, whether it's adding a workflow, new fields, or new data structures altogether. You're more than happy, you can definitely do it yourself, but we're also happy to help with this configuration and identify where functionalities can be added and what improvements we can make to bring that greatest impact to your team. So always feel free to contact us with those questions. And then, of course, before you roll out anything broadly, you'll want to test it. This is also how you're validating your system. You can use a small group of users or test a data subset of what you want to kind of run everything through. And then you'll need to gather feedback and adjust based off what those test results look like. This step is really important to ensure that users are adopting the functionality and it prevents disruption with day-to-day workflows, so you can make sure everything is a smooth process. Some ways our users test items is either creating a test folder within their instance of Sample Manager. That way it's very obvious in your audit log that the data entered there is for testing purposes. Other times, users will have a staging or a testing server set up purely for trying out new functionality and performing their own quality checks on the system setup. So we can kind of walk through what options might be available for you. And finally, you'll then need to transition your lab to that new workflow process. This is often the hardest part, not really the technical setup, but the people side of making sure they understand why we're making those changes, they're getting trained on them, and that everything runs smoothly afterwards. So a few best practices for that are to communicate clearly what's changing and why. You'll want to highlight the benefits to the users and not just the system. Be like, look, you don't have to look at this really long table. We're using calculated fields that's going to tell you what you need to do to reduce the need from jumping from window to window, because that gets annoying really fast. We want to reduce that for you. And then you want to provide guidance or training on this, right? People won't necessarily pick it up if they just see a brand new data field. They'll ask you questions. What is this? Why is this here? Why are we doing this? You'll want to have an actual training plan for those users. And then, if possible, you'll roll it out in phases. Just like you're adopting and implementing new features in phases, you'll want to roll them out, those changes out in phases as well, so users aren't completely overwhelmed with a brand new workflow. The goals for this is to make the change feel helpful and not disruptive, because even the best solution won't succeed if it's not actually adopted by its users. So with that, what are some common adoptions users use to help streamline their processes, just so you can get some inspiration? It's not an exhaustive list, but this is where I see a lot of users get very fast uh, help within their system. So first are barcodes. Sample Manager can recognize samples that are already labeled. So if you receive samples that have barcodes on them, fantastic, we can recognize those. But we can also generate our own barcodes with integration with Bartender. And this really helps to reduce manual errors. It makes your samples a lot easier to read what's on the label if they're printed out instead of being handwritten. And then it also speeds up your process when you're working with samples in bulk. Instead of having to type in every single sample when you're checking them into storage or you're searching for them, you can quickly scan them in, and it helps also validate that you're putting samples into the correct storage location. This is available for everyone that's using Sample Manager Starter and up, so you can definitely implement it today. And then the next feature that I absolutely love, it's one of my favorite features, are calculated columns. As I said earlier, they can reduce manual errors, highlight quality issues, and they add a lot to sample management that you wouldn't have been able to before. If you pair these with our conditional formatting, your data will really be able to highlight critical areas that need to be addressed. Calculated columns are available in Sample Manager Professional and up, and then our conditional formatting is available in our LIMS and up. And then workflow automation is also fantastic to help make sure you're working with the right samples, you're streamlining those processes. And Hannah will discuss it a lot more later, right after this, actually. So I won't go into too much detail, but this is going to be available in our LIMS and up. And of course, if you need help with that, or integrating new features, discussing how your data is currently set up, contact us. You can email us at help@labkey.com. This is a great email. It's going to be a shared inbox. So if I'm out of the office, someone else will be able to step in very quickly to get you that help that you need. And then, of course, I always recommend you read our newsletters and our release notes. This is going to highlight new features we have in the system because, like I said, we're adding new features regularly. For our non-validated clients, that's a new feature or a new release every month with Sample Manager. For validated, that's 3 times a year. So you'll want to read those to see what's new, see if you want to implement it to your lab. So with that, today we looked at how to examine your current data and improve its data integrity, how to maintain your system over time, and how to add new functionality to your lab. If you have any additional questions, feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A, and I'll go ahead and answer them now. And of course, email us if you have any questions after this user conference at help@labkey.com. And thank you all so much for joining us today. So I'll go ahead and start reading some questions. Having text choices makes it more difficult to upload using Excel. How do you get around that? So that is a fantastic question, right? Because text choices, it is restricting the data you can enter, and that's by design. We want to restrict that data because we don't want typos. Those typos decrease the quality of the data that you're entering. So one way to do that is that Excel, if you're uploading that method, has validators that you can add. So it has those text drop downs in there to prevent users from having those type down or typos. So if you add a validator from the template that we provide in Sample Manager, that will really help make sure you're entering in data correctly and we don't spit out those errors, because if you try to upload a spreadsheet with those errors, we're going to say, hey, you're not entering in data correctly, you need to fix it. So that can help kind of improve that data integrity. If you want help doing that, more than happy to kind of meet with you and see how we can get that template set up. Within our LIMS product, you can also store those custom templates within the system to really help make sure users are only using that correct template.